What's up guys, Filterless here. Today we're going to be covering quite the video. It's about 220 recordings over 20 gigs and we're testing 7 watts to 15 watts on the ROG Ally versus the Steam Deck. So let's go ahead and jump straight into it. And here's the reason we're testing 7 watts. Armory Crate only goes to 7. You can go lower with other software, but 7, as you'll see in these tests, is as low as you're really going to want to go. So you can actually use Armory Crate to lower it down, but as you'll see, there is a recommendation that I will have if you're trying to save power. And if you do enjoy the channel and it provides some value, make sure to hit the like button. It definitely helps the channel out. And the first game is Subnautica. We're running 720p medium settings on both. So we have the Steam Deck on the right, the ROG Ally on the left. All right, and starting here at 7 watts, we're at 24 FPS on the left and the Steam Deck is at 47. So the Steam Deck is still a low wattage warrior for sure. Jumping over to 8, we got another 4 FPS on the left at 28 versus 54. We're kind of going to jump through these really fast, and then at the end of some of these I have a fun test I ran where I lowered the Steam Deck wattage even more to match the ROG Ally, just to see what numbers we get. At 9 watts, now we're climbing a little on the left, 34 and about 63 on the right. Jumping over to 10, now we're at 42 on the left, 65 on the right. And another interesting thing to note, we're using actually 2 gigs of VRAM on the right versus 1.8 on the left. I would have thought it actually would be reversed. We'd be using less VRAM on SteamOS. Moving on to 11 watts, now we're at 51 on the left, 67 on the right. So you can see the Steam Deck is kind of starting to level off, but the ROG Ally is just starting to wake up. And now hitting 12 watts, 62 on the left, 69 on the right. The gap is definitely closing around 12, 13 watts in this game. And at 13, there we go, we're pretty much neck and neck. So we got 68 on the left, and it just jumped to 71 for a second, and about 69, 70 on the right. So it looks like the ROG Ally is performing a little bit better at 13 watts, which is crazy impressive that it's doing this well at 13 watts. Then bumping on both to 14, we're at 81 on the left now versus 70 on the right. So the Steam Deck has kind of hit that limit in this game, but as we'll see, it's going to change in older games. And this is probably a good time to note, we're doing some more simple games up front, and then we're going to do 5 intense games. So 5 basic games, and then 5 more intense games for the second set of the test. And at 15 watts, we're at 83 on the left, 71 on the right. Now moving on to Bioshock, the original one remastered, 720p with these settings on both. And this is absolutely crazy, 112 on the right at 7 watts. The Steam Deck is unbelievable at these really low wattages. And we've got 47 on the left. Moving on to 8 watts, we're at about 60 on the left, 130 something on the right. Now, one thing to note is if you look at the temperatures at the top, we're at about 70 Celsius on the Steam Deck, whereas we're only at about 46 on the ROG Ally. So it's just barely sipping power. It's totally built for those higher wattages. And moving on to 9 watts, 78 on the left and about 148 on the right. And moving on to 10 watts, you might be wondering, if you look at the GPU usage, why is it only at 57%? My take on it is the CPU does not handle well on the ROG Ally at lower wattage. It really needs higher wattage in a game like this that's going to be more CPU bound, whereas the Steam Deck is tuned very well. The CPU can sip power and it runs extremely well. And here at 10 watts, we're at about 97 on the left versus 157 on the right. And even at 11, the ROG Ally, you can see 61% GPU, and it's just that CPU really needs those watts to be able to function properly. And you can see the GPU on the right, we're at about 90%, and it's getting 164 on the right, 102 on the left. Moving on to 12 watts, it's somewhat closing, 113 on the left, 170 on the right, but still a pretty big gap. 13 watts, not much difference. The Steam Deck is kind of leveling off as it gets to its max power at about 170, and the ROG Ally slowly climbing, so 135. 14 watts, we're at 149 now, 150, and about 173 on the right. So you can see that Steam Deck's leveling off for sure. And then at 15 watts, the ROG Ally did not catch it, and so the Steam Deck wins this one at 170, I want to say 6 or 7. It kind of jumps around. and the ROG Ally is at about 155. Now here's a fun test I wanted to run. I wanted to see the Steam Deck at 5 watts versus the ROG Ally. What will we need on the ROG to match the performance? And it's actually 8 watts. So it's just crazy how well it sips the power. Moving on to Portal 2, we're at 1080p with the highest settings on both of them. It's matched. Starting off at 7 watts, we can see we are at about 28 FPS on the ROG, 67 on the Steam Deck. Jumping to 8 watts, we're at about 29 versus 76. Here we got 9 watts, so just 35 on the left, 85 on the right. Jumping to 10, it's starting to climb, 47 versus 90. And at 11 watts, we're at about 60 on the left and 90 on the right. Moving up to 12, now we're at 70 on the left and 94 on the right. So it's this, the ROG Ally is starting to climb faster. At 13, 77 versus 96. At 14, we're at about 80 versus 98 now. And then 15 watts, it was starting to get close. We're at 87 versus 99. However, even at 15 watts in this game and Portal 2, the ROG Ally did not catch up. And I wanted to show y'all just how crazy the power sipping ability is. We're at 5 watts on the Steam Deck versus 9 on the ROG Ally. And look at those numbers. The Steam Deck's actually slightly ahead at 37 with 4 additional watts at this low wattage. All right, moving on to Borderlands, we're running 720p, and you might be running why it says custom on the left instead of ultra like it does on the right. It's because I had to knock the ROG Ally down to 720p, and for whatever reason, I could not get the Steam Deck to run 1080p. I wanted to do 1080 when it let me, but here's the settings across both. We got the exact same settings going. Here at 7 watts, we're at 22 on the left versus 58 on the right. I cannot believe 720p medium settings and the Steam Deck is running about 60 FPS. That's insane. Moving on to 8 watts, we're at 30 versus about 70. So we got about 10 FPS jump on the Steam Deck going to 8 and about 8 FPS on the ROG Ally. Now moving on to 9, we got about a 10 FPS bump on the left for the ROG at about 40. And the Steam Deck only got about a 3 FPS bump here at 9 watts. Moving on to 10, now we're at 55 versus about 75. Jumping to 11, it's starting to close, 62 on the left, 77 on the right. At 12 watts, we're at 64 versus 70. I want to say 7 or 8. 13 watts, 71 versus 70, maybe 8 now. So you can see the Steam Deck slowing down quite a bit. Then here, the ROG Ally is starting to wake up. We got 76, I want to say, on the left versus 79 on the right. And then at 15 watts, extremely close, 79 on the left and about 79 on the right. So right there, very close at 15 watts. And I also want to point out again, at 15 watts, look at the GPU on the left. Because this game is utilizing the CPU more, it's not letting the GPU max out at utilization, and that's the issue. Any game where there is more CPU intensive, that CPU really likes the extra watts. Here in a minute, when we get into the more graphics demanding games, you'll see how this starts kind of flipping a bit. And just as a fun test, I wanted to run 5 watts on the right versus 8 on the left. So I found where they matched up, and you can see 31 on the left, 31 on the right or so for the Steam Deck. So very close, 5 and 8, just like we saw actually earlier. Moving on to a game some people might like is Fable Anniversary Edition. And we're running medium settings across the board, 720p. I don't know why the text looks a little blurrier, but as you can see, jumping into the game, the actual clarity is very similar between them when we're in the game. And at 7 watts, we're at 24 on the left and 70, 67, 68 on the right at 7 watts. So here we go at 8 watts, 36 versus 76, 9 watts, 43 versus 83, 10 watts, 46 versus 87, 88 at 11, 53 on the left, about 92 on the right, 93. 12 watts, starting to close the gap a little, but still a bit of a gap here. 60 on the left versus 95 on the right. That's 35 or so FPS at 12 watts gain on the Steam Deck. That's very impressive. 13 watts, now we're at 65 versus about 94 or 5. Then at 14, we're at about 70 versus close to 100, about 97. Then at 15, didn't quite catch it. Definitely need more time. And you can see the GPU only 65 on the left. So this is another game, because these older games that used a lot of CPU, the CPU on the ROG Ally just doesn't like these lower wattages, so it's really suffering. The Steam Deck loves the low watts. So we're at 73 versus 99. Once again, I decided to run the 5 watt versus 8 watts, and we're getting real close. The ROG Ally is a little ahead, but I got the closest result I could pull, and so we're about 38, 37 on the left versus about 34, 35 on the right. All right, jumping into the demanding games, we have Crysis, high settings, 720p across the board, exact same settings. Now we're on to the demanding games. One thing I do want to point out, no matter how low I lowered the wattage on the ROG Ally, it would not go below 8. It did this in a few games. It refused to, no matter what. I even tried handheld companion to get it down further. It was stuck at 8, and I'm guessing it's due to the CPU, so it would not go lower. So you can see here at 8 watts, we're still at 13 on the left, and you can see at 8 watts on the right, 21 FPS versus 14 on the left. Now jump into 9 watts, we can see 14 on the left versus 25 on the right. So the Steam Deck is getting these nice bumps at this really low wattage. Then at 10 watts, we got about 17 on the left, 27 on the right. Here at 11, we're at about 19, 28, 12, the ROG is starting to wake up a little, 22 versus 29. At 13 watts, 26, 30, the gap is closing quickly at this point. You can see our GPU is pretty much 98% on the ROG and 99% on the Steam Deck, and we're at about 30, 30 at 14 watts. So very close performance at 14 watts in more demanding games like Crysis. And then at 15 watts, we're at about 32 on the left versus 31. Now these are much lower FPS, so if we're at 60, it would be more like 62 versus 60, but still very close in performance at 15. The ROG Ally is just slightly beating the Steam Deck. Moving on to Cyberpunk, we're using the Steam Deck preset. I don't know why. This is something very interesting. If you look, texture quality shows high on the left, but the Steam Deck preset on the Steam Deck doesn't give that option, so I'm not sure what the default would be. So I scrolled through all of these settings and they all look to be the same to me. Y'all could see if y'all notice any differences between them. I tried to get them exactly matched, and we're running 720p. Starting off at 7 watts, you can see the ROG Ally is actually using 9. It would not go down. It said I'm using 9 and it would not change. So it is at 9. So we'll go ahead and jump to 9 watts. All right, so here we are at 9 watts, which is what the ROG Ally was going to run at no matter what. And you can see we're at about 19 on the left versus 28 on the right for the Steam Deck. And that's really impressive for these low wattage numbers. Then moving to 10, 20 versus 30. Here at 11, we're at 23, 31. So we got about 3 FPS on the left, but only about 1 on the Steam Deck. Now we're at 27 on the left at 12 watts versus 32. So we only got 1 frame for an additional watt on the Steam Deck on the right. Then at 13, this gap is super close. 30 on the left, 31 on the left, 33 on the right at 13 watts. And at 14 watts, we're only at about 31, 32 on the left versus 34 on the right. Not the jump I was thinking we would see. Then at 15, very close, 34 on the left, about 35 on the right. So the Steam Deck actually still stayed ahead a little bit, even in a crazy demanding game like Cyberpunk. And this was using the Steam Deck preset, so that might have benefited the Steam Deck a little. I'm not sure. Moving on to Resident Evil 2 Remastered. We're running high settings, 720p, and here's the settings real quick if you just want to see and compare them both. All right, starting off at 7, once again the Ally is using 8, so it will not go lower in a lot of these games, and I don't think you'd want to on the Ally. That's the thing, you want to stay at a higher power level. And at the end I'm going to give my recommendation and a few more thoughts. So here at 8 watts, we're at 23 on the left, 37 on the right. At 9, 24 versus 42. At 10 watts, about 28, 29 versus 45. 11 watts, we're at 34 now with 48 on the right. 12 watts, 40 on the left, 49. So the gap's starting to close at 12 again. Here we are at 13, 47 and 50. So very close. And then 14 is very, very close. So we're at 51, 52. And then at 15, basically identical, about 53, 53. They kind of jump around a little, so very similar performance, which is great because 15 watts used to be Steam Deck's territory, and you can see the ROG is doing pretty well at this 15 watt range with the new BIOS 323. Moving on to Doom 2019, we're at 720p with just the default high settings. As you can see here, they're exactly the same. And for whatever reason, I don't know if y'all have experienced this, but Doom refused to let the monitor show up. It was basically hiding it, and it stopped the command center from coming up. I don't know what happened, so I went ahead and added it to MSI Afterburner, which is what you're seeing on the left. And at 7 watts, it is utilizing 7. We're at 25 versus about 47 on the right. At 8 watts, we've jumped to 31 on the left, 53 on the right. 9 watts, getting a nice boost, 39 versus 59, 60 now on the right. 10 watts, the gap is definitely closing, 48, 65. 11 watts, 59, 71. 12 watts, 68, 74. Once again at 13 watts, extremely close. We're at about 77, 77. And then going to 14, now we're at 84 on the left, about 80 on the right. Then jumping to 15, 91 on the left versus 81 on the right. The ROG Ally can just keep going. So we have another 15 watts we can use, but it does kind of level off as you approach the 30 watt range. Then moving on to Dying Light, we're at 720p, best quality preset on both. And I still scroll through the settings because I want to make sure when I'm running these benchmarks that every single setting is exactly the same. Starting off at 7 watts, it's a kind of a pointless test because you can see on the left, we're at 9 watts already. So the ROG Ally will not go down to 7 on this game. So jumping to 9 watts, you can see we're at 23 on the left versus about 45 on the right. And 10 watts, we're at 26 versus about 49. 11 watts, 31 versus 51. Moving on to 12, 38 versus 53. And what you'll notice is the Steam Deck, it's one of those where it really jumps from about 5, 6, 7 going up to about 10 or 11. And it's like the ROG Ally, it's just a lower power package. So as you approach that very high limit, it does start leveling off. Just like with the ROG, if you went to the 18, 19, 20, and then you started approaching 30, there's not a whole lot of performance gain. Jumping on to 14, we're at 49 on the left, 56 on the right, so the gap is starting to close. And then 15 watts, about 52 on the left, 56 on the right. So the Steam Deck stayed ahead in this test, even with a pretty demanding game like Dying Light. So moving on to the charts, I might sound a little tired. I just got done with the editing and I am pretty tired, but I wanted to get this out before I go to bed. And we have Subnautica up first. And if you take a look how crazy the Steam Deck is at 7 watts. So you can see Steam Deck's getting its nice bumps right here as it approaches around 10 watts or so and then kind of levels off, whereas the ROG Ally just keeps getting these nice performance bumps, and it would probably keep going. Even though it looks like it's leveling off here, I would say it would keep going as we would up wattage. And you can see in Subnautica, once we approach the 13 watts in that game, the ROG Ally actually took over at 71 versus 69, and then just boosting up even further after that. Moving on to Bioshock, this is where it really gets crazy. It's a very CPU intensive game, and you can see 112 because it's just built for those lower watts, whereas we're only about 47. But then we start climbing and you can see the Steam Deck kind of gets around the 10, 11 watts, and then starts leveling off a little bit since that's its high power range. And the ROG Ally just keeps jumping like steps down here. And it's kind of weird. It almost slows down around these wattages in some of the games, it seems, and then kind of boosts back off. And you can see we got up to 155 at 15 watts, and obviously this is well above playable, so but still the Steam Deck, this is really impressive. It's because the ROG Ally is just struggling for watts. That's what it is in this game. I'm pretty sure it just doesn't like the lower watts, and the Steam Deck does. So yeah, we got a bit of a difference, 176 versus 155 at 15 watts for Bioshock. Then Portal 2, very similar all across the board. These are all really close. So the Steam Deck kind of boosts up a bit and goes and then starts leveling off a little, and then we have the ROG struggling down here, and then once it starts getting some extra juice, you just see it stair step down and it really starts boosting up. And so we ended that one at 99 for the Steam Deck, 87 for the ROG Ally and Portal 2. Borderlands was very interesting how at 7 watts, I mean, it makes me want to play this game on the Steam Deck and set it to an 8 watt limit, 60 FPS. You'd be good to go pretty much in this one with this kind of performance, and you really don't get a whole lot as you go all the way up to 15 on the Steam Deck. And then you have the ROG Ally really struggling down here at the 7 watt range, but then we got 8, 9, 10, 11. It just keeps on going, and it would probably just kind of keep this trend, maybe not this drastic, but as soon as it gets around this 10, 11 watt range, we'd probably see a steady increase along this line right here. Just keeps on going. And you can see we tied at 15 watts on Borderlands. Moving on to Fable, very similar to Borderlands that we just looked at. It kind of boosts up and then levels off a bit, and we have the ROG Ally just stair stepping as we go along all the way to 15 15 watts, and we ended that one at 99 and about 73. Then Crysis. So this is getting into the much more demanding games, and we couldn't get, if you remember from the benchmark I was showing y'all, the ROG Ally would actually not go below 8. And from this chart, it stayed at the same FPS, so it was probably closer to 9, but just showing a reading of 8, and it was pretty much stuck at 9. It would not go below no matter what. So we can see at 7 watts, the Steam Deck is getting about 17. At 10 watts, the ROG Ally is getting 17. So that's really impressive on the Steam Deck part to be able to pull the same FPS with 3 less watts at this lower watt range down here. And then once again, the Steam Deck right around that 10-11 kind of levels off a bit. And then we got the ROG Allies doing its stair step down, and it'll probably keep going even past 32. I think I saw 40 around 30 watts, so it definitely keeps going, but it does start dropping after 15. You kind of get this effect right here, just like with the Steam Deck if you were to keep going on the ROG. And we got 32 for the ROG Ally on Crysis versus 31, and we tied right around the 14 watt range. Moving on to Cyberpunk, very similar again here. It looks like the Steam Deck actually kind of stair stepped a bit and kept increasing as it raised that wattage. And then on the ROG, it would not go below 9 watts. It actually, based off of this FPS, it actually was probably more like 9.5 or so, since we're at 19 here, 20 here. And then as we started increasing 11 watts, you can see it stair stepping, and it would definitely keep on rolling. We've seen some benchmarks where we're getting well above this. However, this was the Steam Deck preset, and I don't know if there's anything that would be specifically tuned in a way that benefits the Steam Deck. Maybe so. So if we just did a medium one, that could be different, but I thought it'd be fun to do the Steam Deck preset, and it runs really well on the ROG Ally. So some of you might actually want to try that out and see what you think. And then at 15 watts, very close, but the Steam Deck was just slightly ahead. Moving on to Resident Evil 2, we can see right here, we tied at about 15. And once again, it did not want to go very low. It was probably 8.5 was the lowest it would go, even when set down to 7. So we see 23, 24, and then we start seeing those jumps off to the right and tying down there. Moving on to Doom, you can see the Steam Deck actually kept getting pretty good bumps all the way up to about 14 watts, then kind of leveled off, and the ROG Ally really got some performance jumps. So you can see 25, 31, 39, it just keeps going. Actually tied at 13, and then just really started pulling ahead at those higher wattages. And if we would have kept going, this would have been way over here as we're approaching the 20 watt mark, 25 watts. And then the last game, Dying Light, once again, this was basically 9 watts. It would not go down to 8 or 7. And we can see the Steam Deck does about the same thing, 10, 11 watts. And then the ROG Ally does it stair stepping all the way. And at the end at 15 watts, we're at 52 on the ROG, 56 on the Steam Deck. And so I would say for those of you who have a Steam Deck, I actually would recommend about 11 watts. Probably if you're trying to save battery, locking it to 11 or even 10, you're only losing a little bit of frames if you're really wanting to save on power. And so for ROG Ally owners, I actually think you could go down to right at 13 watts and enjoy the experience. And you might be thinking, well, 44 watts versus 54, but there's a key difference between the ROG Ally and the Steam Deck. The ROG Ally has FreeSync, and it makes a huge difference. When the Steam Deck goes below a solid cap frame, you definitely see it. Whereas in the ROG Ally, you can go 47 all the way down into the 30s, and it's really smooth. You hardly notice it. So we might be seeing 54 here for the Steam Deck. Well, the thing is, if you capped it at 54, it would not be the best experience because it would constantly be dipping down, and you'd want to cap it a lot lower. You'd probably want to cap it at about 45 to make sure you stay there. And there's a lot more latency as well, because with FreeSync, you can have VSync turned off. I would almost argue that the 38 FPS here beats the 54 on the Steam Deck as far as just the experience of playing the game. I know some people might not agree, but FreeSync is that good. If the Steam Deck had FreeSync, I would probably just be using that as a primary device. Honestly, that is the one main thing that it lacks that just makes it somewhat unbearable for me, but I know a lot of people love it. I'm not bashing it. I have a Steam Deck. I bought a 1 terabyte for the Steam Deck. I do like the device. I just like the ROG Ally more. I created a whole channel on it. Anyway, guys, that's going to wrap it up for this test. I really hope y'all liked it. I hope it provided some value, whether you have a Steam Deck or a ROG Ally. If you did get some value from it, make sure to hit the like, sub button, and I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.